In 2019, the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility commissioned a regional diagnostic study to understand what's going on with the application of building codes and standards in the Pacific. So we have here a matrix of the status of building codes in the Pacific. So out of the 13 countries under PRIF, 10 out of 13 have building codes. I think all of them were using the 1990 version of the building code. And in some countries, that building code had been legislated. And also recently, 5 out of those 13 countries had recently updated their building codes. The process of updating of building codes also in other countries are progressing. For example, Tuvalu will now soon finalize the updating of their building codes with assistance from ADB and World Bank. Currently, Solomon Islands are doing the updating of their building code, and DFAT is supporting that, as well as the corresponding capacity building and capacity training needs that would ensure dissemination and compliance to the building code. ADB will also support the updating of building code in Vanuatu. PRIF and MFAT of New Zealand will support Kiribati in updating their building code. We haven't started yet, but it is something that will happen within the year. And also recently, World Bank supported Fiji in updating of the guidelines for single-story houses, single-story buildings, and school buildings, which is almost similar as the home building manual. So during the process of this regional diagnostics, we'd had a series of dialogues and participatory workshops in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, with various stakeholders, both from the government and from the private sector. And we had good discussions with practitioners also, engineers, the architects, and the builders, contractors on the ground. And there have been like a strong interest from the private sector to have a review or update of their building code, and also they're very keen to have capacity training on how to apply the new provisions of these codes. And they also want probably some regulatory function on the government side to ensure compliance in this updated building codes. There were also some apprehension on the cost implication of complying to the building code. So I think a lot of the people think that it may become more expensive to be building their houses if they follow the building code. There's some confusion on that. And there are also a lot of materials that have been available also because of the responses of various donors during big like catastrophic events, and wherein they had to build shelters, temporary relocation areas, and they would want to ensure that what they are building are better than what had been destroyed. So with those things put into consideration, it was suggested that there has to be like a tiered approach on the building code. So for example, the National Building Code will be applied for buildings that are 3 stories above, or for buildings that are being used for public shelter or for gathering of a large amount of people, or if they're being used as hospitals and other functions of government. The home building manual can be used for single or two-story houses and similar structures, wherein they will be having some guidelines on what they can do without the need for an engineer to design specifically the structure that they would want to build. So I'll be discussing more in the subsequent slides on how this home building manual looks like. And also there's this proposal to come up with a traditional construction handbook, and if it would be better if it can be made available in local language. And these are for shelters and also for traditional houses that are still using traditional materials. So looking at the old building code and the updated building code, there are also certain provisions that were added corresponding the additional elements that they have included in there on climate change, energy efficiency, and some other aspects. So you can see here the comparison of the 1992 building code and the 2017 building code. So provisions on hazardous substances was added. Also a section on climate change and adaptation. Also discussion on natural disaster resilience. I mean, just to illustrate some of the new additions to the updated building code. And the idea is that this building code is intended to be used by building design professionals. It covers all types of buildings with some exclusions, and it will be performance-based outcomes through achieving with deemed to satisfy solutions or a performance solution. Also, frequent references to external standards to achieve intended outcomes. So in the Pacific, people are familiar with Australian standards or New Zealand standards, because most of the countries do not have their own standards. It's quite an expensive process to have, and most of the countries do not have laboratories, their own laboratories to be it's like defining standards of various construction materials. So they would just refer to Australian standards or New Zealand standards. And also with using this building code requires highly technical up-to-date knowledge of construction industry practices. So if we try to look at the building group categories that are included in the building code, so we have here it's like 5 groups of building categories and the description and their respective descriptions. Like for example, building group 1 refers to buildings, facilities, or major infrastructure whose function serves a large area or a large number of people in Samoa. And building group 5 refers to Samoan Fale, or the single unit residential or the traditional houses that they have there. Looking at building group category 3, This refers to buildings which may house groups of people, vulnerable population, or fulfill a role of importance to the community or village. They have further description of what kind of buildings are they. So these are communal residential buildings, greater than 350 square meters, multiple unit residential buildings, and assembly buildings, tourist accommodations, aged care buildings, office or commercial buildings greater than 350 square meters, or mixed-use buildings, or industrial storage buildings, and some heritage buildings. The reason why I highlighted that different building types in category group 3 is that there are certain provisions that are required for certain building groups and building types, and in this case building lifespan is required for building groups 1, 2, 3, also for aged care facility, for commercial buildings, and also for retail and mixed-use buildings. The description of this building lifespan provision that they have talks about, building sustainability, wherein they would want to ensure that building group 3, those buildings that are under building group 3 must demonstrate durability, efficient use of building materials, and reduction of carbon footprint by the preparation and implementation of one of the following building life cycle evaluation system or an approved equivalent. So they have here recommendations of this assessment tools or ratings on that will look at fossil fuel consumption, global warming potential, acidification potential, and other implications of the building. And I think most of these tools are looking at life cycle assessment, and I think we're more familiar with the Green Guide calculator, or I think you're familiar with the energy efficiency ratings also that many buildings has, and I think those are based on this assessment.